Are you telling me
that the man may be 500 years old?
A 20th century astronaut is frozen in time and revived in the year 2491, where he becomes a space adventurer whose side hustle is introducing the heights of 1970s culture to his new friends. In the 25th century, there are robots, spandex, robots in spandex, and after the incident in the laundry, spandex in robots. Also thriving in the 25th century, apparently, disco. Buck Rogers in the 25th century.
It appears you have returned to Earth 504 years later.
Buck Rogers in the 25th century was a popular pulp story and comic that became a television series developed by Glen, Larson and Leslie Stevens that would run for 2 seasons on NBC between 1979 and 1981. And it's one of those series that I personally could never get enough of back in the day.
at ease, Captains Rogers? Make yourselves at home.
People sleeping and waking up a long time later was not a particularly new idea, but boy, was it an easy shortcut to telling a fish out of water story.
Mugged?
It's an old 20th century custom. Come on, I'll give you a demonstration.
You had people falling asleep or drinking some potion or being poisoned or being frozen at ultra low temperatures in some way. But don't do what my old schoolmate Darren did and try all 3 while driving a big rig in Alaska.
I have a feeling I'm going to be here a while.
In 1987, NASA launched a deep space probe that encountered some anomaly or something in space that froze everything, including its pilot, Captain William Anthony Rogers, known to everybody as Buck Rogers, which was an uncomplimentary nickname given to him by waiters.
The other is, you don't have to tip them.
His craft is found in space 500 years later, only to find that Earth has been through some sort of holocaust, and even worse, George R.R. Martin still hasn't finished A Song of Ice and Fire. Back on Earth, Buck, after adjusting to his new surroundings, becomes a freelance troubleshooter for the Earth Defense Directorate alongside new friends Colonel Wilma Deering, Department Head Dr. Elias Huer, robotic genius Dr. Theopolis, and smart-mouthed ambiquad droid Twiki. Buck will find himself in various space adventures on a space cruise liner, a space version of Las Vegas, the Space Olympics, he'll deal with a space vampire, and various threats to Earth's security coming from space.
Captain Buck Rogers. Meet Captain Buck Rogers.
Buck Rogers is a man out of time who spends some of the first season being quite wistful for his past, the things that he's known and the people that he's cared for. He'll spend some time trying to recreate things from the past, but here in the 25th century, he's finding life is just a little bit too clinical and run by computers.
If you call that interfering, there's something wrong with your fucking wagnalls.
His strengths are that he often has better instincts and faster reflexes than many of the people in the 25th century.
Don't make them like they used to.
In Buck's mind, everything was better in the good old days. Yeah, he's that guy.
They sure don't make these like they used to.
500 years is a lot of catching up to do. I mean, your phone's probably too old to get the latest system updates.
Well, the Olympics have sure changed since my time, Twiki.
And then there's the matter of all the compound interest from the debt incurred by Buck Rogers because he forgot to cancel his World of Warcraft subscription before heading off into space.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Gil Gerard had been appearing in commercials and daytime soaps with a few small film roles, though according to Glen Larson, he saw Gerard at a party and thought that, hey, that guy was Buck Rogers. The character of Buck Rogers for the series was somebody who was meant to be cool in a fight, whether it be high-kicking villains or dogfighting in space. He was meant to be somebody with a quick wit, though as we'll see, that idea would be the source of a lot of behind-the-scenes friction.
For a man whose expertise is allegedly 5 centuries old, you seem quite opinionated.
Colonel Wilma Deering was initially depicted as cold and aloof, but she would quickly become Buck's closest human friend. Wilma would often carry out a story role that was parallel to Buck, where of course they'd meet up at the end of the episode. This was partly by design, and partly to appease the show's star.
Oh, I see. Maybe.
Erin Gray was a contract player at Universal and had initially not wanted to continue with the series after the pilot. Gray eventually rejoined the series as Wilma, where any sexual tension that had built up over the pilot between Buck and Wilma would evaporate because, in the 25th century, it's complicated is the default relationship status.
Then this plant knows hate.
Dr. Elias Huer was the head of the Earth Defense Directorate and nominally Wilma's boss. He was the man who would be handing out assignments. He's a fairly stiff technocrat played with a lot of humanity by Tim O'Connor, where he managed to turn a pretty threadbare character into somebody who was always quite watchable.
Quite unusual. Why do you say chilly?
As Buck tried to introduce his new friends to things he knew from the 20th century, there was often a strong resistance toward trying some of Buck's noxious concoctions.
He's cooking dinner for me tonight.
I'm sorry.
Of course, it's the ingredients, which by the 25th century were getting quite hard to find. You couldn't just pop down to Trader Joe's. Buck tries to make soup or make his own wine, and at one point asks Twiki to make a ping pong table, but that doesn't quite work out as intended.
A ping pool table? I ordered a ping pong table, Twiki.
While the show was nominally about a 20th century man who found himself out of touch with the 25th century, here's a dude, supposedly from 1987, who is culturally stuck in the late 70s.
All right.
Which, if nothing else, would at least make Buck Rogers a hero to the maths teacher I had in 1987.
What are you doing?
It's called getting down. It's a little before your time if it frightens you.
Most of the major characters appearing in the Buck Rogers pilot were versions of characters from the pulp era, though brought up to date. Originally, Wilma and Huer were fairly generic stock characters, a damsel often in distress, and a boffin. Killer Kane was a stock villain. The exceptions were the computer Dr. Theopolis and the diminutive ambiquad Twiki.
He appears to be truly torn by the situation.
Dr. Theopolis was originally part of Earth's ruling computer council, but in the series would mainly be ferried about by Twiki as if you put Mr. Spock into a canteen. He was voiced on the series by Eric Server, and if you listen carefully, it does sound like the character's just made up his name, where it sounds like he's addressed as Dr. Theopolis, Dr. Theophanis, and most unfortunately, Dr. Theophilus.
Pardon me?
Twiki, on the other hand, was the single element that would be most associated with the series. He was mainly performed by Felix Silla, where Twiki was Buck's best bud.
No kidding.
And in an era of cute droids, Twiki ended up as one of the cutest.
Hey, you want to dance, Wilma?
Thank you, no Twiki.
Ah, nuts.
He was voiced by Blanc, who was famous for creating most of Looney Tunes' most beloved characters: Bugs Bunny, Sylvester, Tweety Bird, Elmer Fudd, and of course Daffy Duck, who featured in his own Buck Rogers parody.
Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century!
This is my second favorite thing in the universe.
Because there's no...
Twiki was there to do whatever Buck needed, and unlike other robots, generally didn't go around and screw things up, though he would occasionally need to be rescued.
Now, you're not a half-bad carpenter, and electrician, and plumber, and tailor.
Initially, the character was meant to be almost entirely non-verbal, just emitting computer noises that would be translated by Dr. Theopolis. Blanc settled on saying "beaty, beaty, beaty," and that was to be it.
What does BT mean?
But then a few quips were dropped into the pilot, and pretty soon, Twiki would become a way to circumvent certain problems that the writers and producers had with getting some sort of humour into the series.
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to hear what Twiki had to say.
Watcha, Buck.
Thank you, Twiki.
Of course, Twiki's constant refrains may get a bit tiresome, where his quips come off as incredibly dated.
Groovy. Get down.
Unlike my incredibly dated refrains, "Where's the beef? Keep on trucking, jive turkey, graded to the max, radical word, fleek, sigma 67.
A legend in your own time.
But they were a way of keeping the show from becoming heavy. Also, as it transpires, Twiki had quite the potty mouth on him.
Twiki, really now?
In the Buck Rogers pilot, Buck was on a deep space mission that left Earth in the year 1987. His ship encountered something in space that froze his controls and the pilot for 500 years. Now, 500 years is a really long time to sleep, and there's absolutely no indication of how many times Buck had to get up to go and pee. While he slumbered, Earth was almost destroyed in a nuclear war, which I'll give Buck credit. That sounds like something that would be very hard to sleep through. His craft is captured by the Draconians, where Princess Ardala is intrigued, and the ship's commander Kane is suspicious. They send Buck back to Earth, where again everyone's very suspicious, thinking he's some sort of spy. Buck is given a tour, including an off-the-books look at what was left on Earth from his time. But Buck is judged to be a traitor and sentenced to death. Though apparently on death row here, you're allowed to attend a function welcoming foreign dignitaries. Buck will eventually expose a plot by the Draconians to attack Earth, and he'll be in a perfect position to help out Earth in the future.
Want to join up?
Who do I have to see to make my move?
Me?
The pilot, directed by Daniel Haller, cost around $3.5 million, which was fairly expensive for a television movie at the time, though it impressed the high-ups at Universal enough to release the pilot theatrically.
What's he saying now?
You don't want to know.
While Battlestar Galactica's pilot had been screened successfully in theaters outside of the US, Buck Rogers would be on the big screen everywhere. That pilot movie hit theatres in early 1979, where it would bring in something like $21 million from the box office worldwide. Something tells me that there might just be something in all of this Buck Rogers bizzo. NBC thought so and ordered a series for the full 1979 TV season.
Sounds official.
Yes.
The character first appeared in a pulp science fiction novel in 1928, written by Philip Francis Nolan. Armageddon 2419 AD was a future war adventure told from the perspective of Anthony Rogers, who investigated some strange gas in a cave and then fell asleep for 500 years. I have sure smelled some really strange gases at fan conventions, but unfortunately I was awake the entire time.
Don't ask.
John F. Dill saw the potential in the story and enlisted Nolan to create a comic strip version for newspaper syndication. Now titled Buck Rogers, the name would quickly become a byword for futuristic adventures and technology. The popular comic strip would inspire several similar characters like Flash Gordon, savior of the universe.
These two people have remained in a state of suspended animation for 500 years. 500 years?
Buck Rogers was soon turned into a radio series and then turned into a live-action serial in 1939. Flash Gordon had made the jump to serials the previous year, starring Larry Buster Crabbe, but after a losing battle with a bottle of hair dye, Buster Crabbe would also play Buck Rogers, and nobody would notice.
The ship's at least 100 years ahead of anything I ever saw.
Of course, if you had all those props and sets from those Flash Gordon serials, it would be a shame not to reuse whatever you could for Buck Rogers. The Buck Rogers serials would later become staples on television, and an edited feature film version was also released. There was also an unrelated Buck Rogers television series made in the early 50s, but that was pretty much it for live action for a very long time.
Tried not to think about it too much.
Then, of course, Star Wars exploded in 1977. Now, not literally, that would have been an insurance nightmare, but all of a sudden, television networks were interested in science fiction themed shows, and this time they were even interested in pitches for expensive series set in space.
Buck Rogers.
Universal had put people onto developing a Buck Rogers project, but like a broken Audi just out of warranty, it wasn't going anywhere anytime soon.
No way, Jose.
Enter Glen A. Larson. He'd launched Battlestar Galactica in 1978, while also working on a version of Buck Rogers with Leslie Stevens, who had previously created the 1960s science fiction anthology series The Outer Limits.
We have every reason to expect success.
The initial plan was similar to that of Galactica, a short series of television movies, but like Galactica, Buck Rogers was reconfigured to be a weekly series.
Well, what are you waiting for, Captain Rogers? Get your butt in formation.
Buck Rogers was an action-adventure series with spaceships, a space opera about humanoids and humanoid technology driving the stories rather than all-powerful beings with magical powers. Buck would go up against people with superhuman abilities, but often there was a technological or science fiction reason for some being having extra special powers. But yes, on occasion, yeah, it was magic. Buck Rogers was not a show that made you work in any way to understand the plots. They were fairly simple, bordering on simplistic. Likewise, characters could often be simplistic, where what you see is what you get.
Very nice, Buck. We don't have a thing to worry about.
And whenever the action kicked in, what you see is really obvious that we've swapped to a stunt double. You just let the fun wash over you, but at the same time, some episodes do tend to stick with you more than others.
Come here often?
There were aliens and robots, but most of the time, the characters here are just like people from Earth. There was a kind of groundedness in Buck Rogers' first season.
Hold the phone.
Continuity wasn't 100% tight as a drum, but the show did manage not to contradict itself too often.
Well, at least I know part of it.
Returning characters were rare, with the most obvious examples being Princess Ardala and Kane as returning villains. Pamela Hensley always seems to be having a ball in a role where she appears to be auditioning either for Batman, Dallas, or Baywatch. Her almost reaching the minimum threshold of what constitutes a costume was matched by Hensley making her an ambitious villainess that you didn't hate. I mean, you almost feel sad for Ardala when Buck constantly rejects her advances.
As punishment for the way the Terrans have insulted me, I'm to be allowed to destroy any city on Earth that I wish.
Kane is another matter. He was played first by Henry Silva and later Michael Ansara. He's basically a military commander who has to babysit the Draconian Emperor's petulant firstborn daughter.
What can she conceivably do with 3 Buck Rogers for an hour and a half?
Wrestler and stuntman H.B. Haggerty would also appear a few times as the almost wordless bodyguard Tiger Man, or at least one of them.
Try it. You'll like it.
When the Buck Rogers project was finally greenlit, Universal would set up their own effects house, Universal Heartland Visual Effects. Heartland would handle all of the effects for Buck Rogers and would also take over the special effects for Battlestar Galactica after that series pilot had been handled by John Dykstra's Apogee Effects, which was in effect ILM after Star Wars had wrapped.
You promise you'll keep walking?
As long as you keep talking.
The special effects on Buck Rogers were usually quite solid, but funnily enough, they improved markedly in the otherwise inferior second season.
Well, you'll have to excuse me, I'm a little new around here. I don't know what any of that means.
Larson would be around during the production of the pilot, but for the weekly series, he handed over the show-running duties to others. For Buck Rogers' first season, the show was overseen by Bruce Lansbury, whose fingerprints were on several series that we've covered, like Mission Impossible, The Magician, Fantastic Journey, and most recently, Wonder Woman.
Thanks, Buck.
Don't mention it.
Lansbury was the sort who would keep the show running on time and within budget, but things behind the scenes weren't always happy. A larger than usual number of the show's writers, even those on staff, would end up using pen names for their credits after they were rewritten or their scripts were given incredibly trashy titles. For the first season of Buck Rogers, there are more pseudonyms used on the credits than at a whistleblower's convention.
Then I'm to assume that I may dispose of Captain Rogers as I see fit.
The show's pilot was re-edited into 2-hour-long episodes with some new scenes added to it to tie it to the weekly episodes. Buck is offered a job to help out the Earth Defense Directorate, but he declines, wanting to get his bearings in the 25th century. But do you really think Buck is just going to sit on his hands and not help out?
No.
After Erin Gray initially declined to return for the series,
I'm really not needed here.
a replacement character was written into the first weekly episode to be filmed. One in Clay was Major Marla Landers, a Wilma-like character who performs the exact same role of a Wilma without being a Wilma. And she was certainly not underwhelming, unless of course you were a massive fan of Erin Gray, who was, let's be honest, overwhelming.
How's that?
Buck Rogers was conceived of as a light show with a charming, easygoing, happy-go-lucky lead character who is quick with a quip, a wisecrack or a joke, somebody who takes some time adjusting to his new world and who enjoyed introducing parts of his old world to his new friends.
This trip is going to be a whole lot of fun.
Very early on, Gil Gerard expressed various frustrations to the show's producers and writers.
Why, Buck?
Why?
As he saw it, he was the series star, so there was a quibble over Erin Gray's role and even her credit. Colonel Wilma Deering outranked Captain Buck Rogers, but it was Gerard's face on the lunchboxes. There are several instances where Wilma's role was reduced in response to Gerard's pressure. One episode that was to feature Wilma in a larger role was at one point rewritten to feature a totally different character, but by the time the episode Space Vampire went before the cameras, it was again a Wilma story, which unsurprisingly became Erin Gray's favourite episode of the whole show.
You know something, Buck Rogers? I'll be there.
You'll often see how Buck and Wilma do not appear together for the bulk of most episodes. Wilma will often go off on her own adventures tangential to the main plot, only meeting up with Buck at the end. During some missions they will meet up and swap notes, and in others, Wilma will mainly appear with Dr. Huer. In the few episodes where Buck and Wilma are together for the whole episode, Gil Gerard and Erin Gray work really well together.
I hope you find what you're looking for.
Gerard wanted the jokes out of the script, where writers would keep a running tab of how many jokes would be cut from a script to appease the show's star.
Twiki? Oh yeah, I'm really at the dumps about him.
Gerard wanted the character to be more introspective, less grinning and more brooding. There are moments every now and then where Buck is wistful and glum after remembering his old life, and this is the type of character that Gerard wanted to play.
Suit yourself.
The thing is, Gil Gerard is good in both modes. The problem was the production was set up to be a light, fun adventure series full of colourful costumes, assuming there are any costumes at all, and very brightly lit sets with a lot of fight scenes. A glum grump brooding in a space bar full of aliens wasn't quite what the setup was meant to be. There were blow-ups between the star and the writers, leading to the show's in-house story editors leaving mid-season.
We seem to have a substantial amount of interference.
It also didn't help that the show's producers were very fond of jazzing up the series by sticking on very trashy episode titles, like Planet of the Amazon Women or Planet of the Slave Girls, which, while they're technically accurate, are just a bit of a tease.
Here, why don't you have a couple more of these? You could use the tonnage.
For most of the first season, Gerard and Gray faced the same problem. Incredibly tight and inflexible spandex costumes that demanded each actor maintain a very, very, very specific weight range. Movement was often difficult, even breathing was a struggle in some of these costumes. At times it's hard to know whether they're meant to be costumes or compression bandages.
This is unfortunate.
Gil Gerard's weight would more obviously fluctuate, leading to some unkind comments behind the scenes. It would get to the point where even mentions of food in scripts had to be used sparingly. Gil Gerard, of course, had a well-documented battle with his waistline, as well as issues with substance use.
I sure like men in uniforms.
It's true, she does.
By the end of the first season, the intensely uncomfortable and often unflattering white uniforms were mostly ditched by Buck and Wilma. When not in uniform, Wilma had a variety of catsuits into which Erin Grey was poured, and later on Wilma got a slightly less painful jacket for her uniform, while Buck's attire got more and more casual, with open shirts revealing the forest of Buck and massive collars that, if they were any wider, would require road closures.
I don't know what that means, but I have a feeling I'm not going to like it.
You're catching on.
Both Gerard and Grey would have less restrictive costumes for the show's second season, much to the chagrin of pervs like my cousin Ted. Oh god, Ted's such a dork. The second season saw Buck in a far more utilitarian and slightly looser clothing, while Wilma was often saddled with a look best described as flight attendant for a regional airline about to go into bankruptcy protection. The guest cast would fare little better, especially the women, where some of the costumes were not particularly designed for practicality. Or indeed, sitting, where an actress might only have a leaning board to rest on between takes. The guest cast could get some pretty wild looks, which adds to the idea that the show's design was from the house of Quattro Formaggio. But when you see what Buck Rogers looked like in the comics and serials, then the eccentric and over-the-top designs seem rather appropriate. Even so, they really do date the show as a relic of the disco era, but not quite as much as any scene set in a space disco.
Let's make ourselves comfortable.
The fashion-forward styles of the 25th century had many looks. Receptionist at a gym, auditioning for Space's Got Talent, misread the instructions on the solarium, attending a poetry slam, speed racers pit crew, solid gold dancers who've opened an outlet store, the colour green going out of business, just got divorced, working through college by parking starfighters, and giving a TED Talk on medallions.
These people got a lot to learn about making cheeseburgers.
With the money saved on fabric for women's clothing, you'd think there'd be a corresponding bump in the budget for sets and props. Buck Rogers was a show that hoped to avoid the budgetary and scheduling issues that had plagued Battlestar Galactica. You know, keep it simple and keep things hustling along.
How do you like our presentation, Captain Rogers?
Most impressive.
Buck Rogers was a show made with speed in mind. Sets would often be redressed between episodes, and lighting was relatively simple, as in, it almost always looks brightly lit, which does have the effect of making the show just look cheap. The thing is, Buck Rogers was not a cheap show to make.
Did you come up with anything in your research to explain what this is?
There was obviously some recycling of props from Battlestar Galactica, such as reusing some models and a couple of the full-size vehicle props. There looked to be 2 full-size Starfighter props, though any you see in the background of a shot are likely a flat wooden cutout. The Starfighter was originally a design Ralph McQuarrie had created when he was producing concept art for Battlestar Galactica. Buck's shuttle appeared in both series, as did the Galactican shuttle, but Buck Rogers tended to create its own ships, with the Draconian battleship, hatchet fighters, rocket sleds, and Hawk's bird fighter in the second season. Perhaps the most egregious example of penny pinching was the fact that the hero vessel in season 2, the Searcher, was a repainted prop that had been used twice in the first season in Vegas and Space and Cruise Ship to the Stars, and neither of those was an explorational vessel.
Yes, does that happen often?
Buck Rogers did go for its own custom-designed hand weapons, but they often feel either really, really small or comically oversized.
Let's just say I need an opportunity.
Almost every science fiction style sound effect in Buck Rogers had been heard earlier in Battlestar Galactica. Buck Rogers pulled in okay Nielsen ratings and ended up at around number 61 out of 100 or so shows. It was ahead of shows like Galactica 1980, Hawaii Five-0, and The Rockford Files, though that sounds less good when you realise none of those shows continued to the next season.
That's very interesting.
Though Buck Rogers was renewed, it would end up as a very different series.
I should think you would have had quite enough.
To improve ratings, major changes would be made in the hope that things improved, and also so that the show could be cheaper to make. To cut a long story short, only one of those things happened.
I thought we were stars.
Guess not.
Producer Bruce Lansbury had known that he would not be returning for a second series before the end of the first year, with the show now being handed over to John Mantley, who had been a producer of the long-running Western series Gunsmoke. Mantley was going to change everything. Earth was no longer home base, there would be no adventures set in various space bars or space discos, no Women of the Week for Buck to help them search for the rest of their costumes, fewer fights, and less of the light-hearted action-adventure feel of the first year.
That's what Searcher is for. To find the lost tribes of Earth.
Season 2 would see Buck, Wilma and Twiki now based on the Searcher, an exploration ship on a mission to find lost human colonies who had fled the Earth during the atomic holocaust. And for the 1981 season, disco was well and truly dead. The tone of the show was just different. The pace was much slower, with more time devoted to dialogue scenes. Unfortunately though, it's not an improvement in any way.
It's fairly exploding with evolutionary development.
There was an overall feel of a show that was much more serious, yet at the same time just impossible to take seriously.
That's a little hard to believe.
Difficult to swallow, you mean?
Doctors Huer and Theopolis were gone, never to be mentioned again, and in fact apart from Buck, Wilma and Twiki, there are almost no links to the previous season and definitely no callbacks to events or characters of that year.
Technically, it shouldn't be possible.
Searcher was now part of some alliance or federation, depending on the episode, and apart from some reuse of the original dress uniforms, there were very few visual clues that this was the same series. Twiki and the Starfighter, and if you look very closely, some set pieces, and that's about it.
I think if you were together for any length of time, you would learn to respect each other.
So if you're thinking this setup sounds like Star Trek's third season mixed in with Lost in Space, but also pinching the premise from Battlestar Galactica, then that's very close.
I think there's a possibility of... Look out, Buck!
A large percentage of each episode would take place on the Searcher, meaning fewer new sets to create each week. There was perhaps a little bit more location work, but most of the planets visited were barely populated. Buck has very little of the charm from before, smiling less often than a Las Vegas gambler who slowly comes to the conclusion that their foolproof roulette system is a load of horse shit.
What?
The Searcher is commanded by Admiral Asimov, played by Jay Garner, as if he was the next-door neighbour of Cheech and or Chong. As the doddery scientist Dr. Goodfellow, Wilfred Hyde-White, whose forgetful and meandering portrayal may not have been 100% acting.
Crichton is here. Hallelujah.
Dr. Goodfellow had created a genius robot who has all the charm of a fresh furball on your new carpet. All are annoying or forgettable, but the second season did bring one welcome element: Hawk, played by Thom Christopher. Hawk was the last surviving member of a race of birdmen who had initially vowed to kill all humans but would make peace with Buck and become part of the crew. Thom Christopher is clearly the coolest thing to happen to the second season of Buck Rogers. But alas, after the introductory episode, he's merely there to make sure that there's nothing for Wilma to do but make sure that the window shades are raised for landing.
The year is 1987.
Canon star William Conrad had provided the opening narration for the pilot and the first season, but for their second year would be replaced by another voice artist, Hank Sims.
NASA launched the last of America's deep space probes,
who was presumably much cheaper than William Conrad, but all I can hear when watching Season 2 episodes is Sims saying,
starring Leslie Nielsen.
With all of that, I do want to report a double homicide. The characters of Wilma and Twiki.
I don't know who I feel sorrier for.
Mel Blanc was replaced by another actor whose voice was now a high-pitched squeak like an animated housefly in a commercial for bug spray.
If you just shut up for a minute, you might learn something.
The only way you could think that it was still the same Twiki was to assume that Mel Blanc had been hit in the groin by a football just before recording his lines. Fortunately, Mel Blanc was brought back for the second half of the series, sans football injury of course.
How about you, Twiki?
What do you mean? How about me? Are we playing guessing games?
Though Twiki mainly just speaks instead of the beaty, or indeed the beaty. Twiki is also much less involved in the action. Before, he'd follow Buck on most missions, though now he's just stuck on the ship as an afterthought. A bit like my nephew in the backseat of my car. Oh shit, back in a minute. Colonel Wilma Deering, a tough fighter and Buck's superior officer, is now dressed like she lives for handing out airsick bags during turbulent flights. Wilma does get off the ship in a few episodes, but most of the time will stay on Searcher, where she will read out loud whatever's on her computer screen. Windows update ready, restarting in 3, 2, wait.
Uh-oh.
Those parallel storylines where Wilma and Buck tackled different parts of the mission before regrouping at the end are pretty much gone. That no-nonsense go-getter from the first season is now only sporadically to be seen. Buck's implied relationship with Wilma, which is more than just friends but not quite seeing each other exclusively, had more or less disappeared for most of the first season, but now it's back where they will flirt with each other like exes who are curious about getting back together until they remembered the incident on the tennis court.
Twiki likes it when we make up.
Erin Gray's stewardess uniform in most episodes at least seemed to be a little more comfortable than the restrictive spandex costumes of the first year, and she was finally allowed to have her hair colour closer to her natural colour. Gil Gerard was apparently initially pleased with the change in direction. until the change in direction proved to be poorly judged time and time again, with science fiction mixing uneasily with the fantasy elements of so many stories. Season 2 was delayed by the 1980 actors' strike, but when new episodes finally debuted in January of 1981, ratings sank like a stone attached to an anchor. Buck Rogers lasted the equivalent of 13 episodes before the plug was pulled.
We're not going to give you Buck Rogers.
It did at least give us Tom Christopher as Hawk, and a noticeable bump in the quality of the visual effects.
Far beyond the world I've known.
Buck Rogers' pilot was launched with a country rock ballad, Suspension, complete with a vocal from Kip Lennon. The song was written by Glen Larson, who of course was a successful musician before he became a television writer. Stu Phillips, who'd often worked on Larson's series, provided the backing score for the pilot and some early episodes, though other composers would come on for the weekly episodes, where Bruce Borton would win an Emmy for his work on the second season episode The Satyr. The first season scores are a mix of disco sounds and a melodramatic orchestra, while the second season soundtracks have a much more traditional orchestral film score sound. For the weekly series intro, Glen Larson's song was turned into an instrumental by Johnny Harris, with a slower guitar version used over the slow motion explosion footage at the end.
It's a video cassette. It's very common in the late 20th century.
Prior to the television series, Buck Rogers was already a byword for something futuristic. And after the series, that would continue, though obviously a generation of viewers would more likely associate Buck Rogers with imagery from this TV show. When NASA introduced the Manned Maneuvering Unit Rocket Pack to the space shuttle missions in the mid-80s, every news report referenced Buck Rogers.
So you're Buck Rogers, huh?
After Buck Rogers, Erin would appear in Silver Spoons and Gil Gerard in Sidekicks, and both would make appearances in episodic television and movies. And they also appeared together in a supporting role in a 2010 pilot of a web series of Buck Rogers that was based on the original printed stories rather than television series.
Does that mean that we will be together for always?
The Buck Rogers comic had a lasting cultural impact, but the series Buck Rogers would be referenced in some unusual places, outside, of course, of just putting Gil Gerard and Erin in a movie. South Park riffed on the storyline where Cartman travelled to the future to get a video game console. Rick and Morty had their bird person character riffing on Hawk. Community has an episode that's aping a dance scene from the pilot, so I guess Dan Harmon really liked Buck Rogers. The video game Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts has a number of television-themed pastiches in its soundtrack, including a riff on the Buck Rogers theme.
I want Buck Rogers.
While there were many video games named Buck Rogers, very few, if any, were based off the television series, apart from a Buck Rogers pinball.
That's an extraordinary story.
There's also a pop song called Buck Rogers by Feeder, but that has pretty much nothing to do with Buck Rogers apart from the title.
Nothing at all.
Buck Rogers is the sort of thing that will probably see another adaptation at some point. As we post this, there's a version of Buck Rogers being worked on right now, but any reboot will likely have no link to the 1979 series unless Universal at some point relicenses the rights to Buck Rogers. This is, of course, as unlikely as being found in a motel by with a pair of, as I said at the start of the video. Buck Rogers just hit for me at the right time when I was into Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica and anything space adventure-y. There are so many shows and movies that I saw when I was young, but my memories of them are often that I watched them and I knew of them, but I didn't actually have any specific memories of scenes in the show. Buck Rogers was a show that I did remember, since I went to see the pilot in a theatre, quite a while before the show made it to television where I lived. Those big letters spelling out Buck's name stuck with me in the same way that the Sensorround effect did when I saw Battlestar Galactica in a theatre. When the television show was on, I watched religiously, or as religiously as you can when you're a kid and don't have control of the remote control. I remembered the excitement when the second season premiered, don't laugh, and I lapped it up. Years later, I lapped it up again, having fun with the cheesy aspects and masking my disappointment at the silly stuff aimed at kids, or the second season's massive change in tone. The silly costumes and floodlit sets still conspire to amplify the cheese. And thank you, I am now looking on eBay to see if somebody actually does sell a cheese amplifier. Even as an adult, the show is just a hell of a lot of fun, despite the very thick application of cheese. It's almost a televisual lasagna, where it's made by putting down a thick layer of cheese, over which you sprinkle some more cheese, and then it's another layer of cheese, and add some more sprinkled cheese, a layer of totally different cheese. Also, because it's Buck Rogers, you have to add a little bit of BT, and BT. And then you top it off with a cheese sauce. Preheat your oven to Mark 3, bake for 40 minutes, but remember to turn it halfway. Allow to cool and then sprinkled with some more cheese. Of course, the lactose intolerant need not apply, unless of course they have access to an ensuite.
So, I finally get to meet the Buck Rogers.
Decades later, I still enjoy it, not just as a guilty pleasure, but as a fun space opera. At least for the first season. You may have noticed we haven't really talked much on the guest stars, of which there were many, or talked about highs and lows of episodes themselves.
Quit talking and start walking.
That's because we're going to come back and look at the episodes individually in another video.
Fuck, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think it will later.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
I do like that toilet. Yeah. It's very futuristic, isn't it? Imagine Buck Rogers taking a dump on that in the 21st century.